So right now, people should be dropping in shortly.
Welcome to the 2022 Public Service Awards presented to you by the American Society for Public Administration, Evergreen chapter. My name is Lucky Angelov, and I'll be facilitating the presentations today. I am currently serving as the president of the local Evergreen chapter for ASPA, and we are going to give attendees a couple of minutes to make sure everybody is getting situated to the webinar. So in the meantime, stay tuned. Get familiar with the interface. I will walk you through potentially what is displaying on your screen. As an attendee, what you'll be able to see right now is myself presenting to you highlighted on the screen. And at the bottom of your screen, you are going to see options, including the chat feature and the Q&A feature, the question and answer features. These two features will be available to you to communicate with us, to ask questions, to congratulate the presenters. And this way we'll be able to accommodate any interactions and questions you might have. Be mindful that this event is being recorded. It will be made publicly available subsequently. And we'll do our best to incorporate all possible features, and we should have the closed captioning feature activated as well. With that said, stick around and we'll give everybody a couple of minutes to log in and to join the presentation. I see people are slowly trickling in, so we'll give everybody a couple of minutes before we begin formally. For those of you that just joined, once again, welcome to the 2022 Public Service Awards, brought to you by the Evergreen chapter of the American Society for Public Administration. We are scheduled to begin at noon. There's still a couple of people joining. For those of you that just joined, would like to welcome you and also to explain some of the features that you're seeing on the webinar screen. You as an attendee have access to the question and answer portal, which will present the questions to us, and we will share those with the presenters. You also have the chat feature where you can say hello to each other. You can use the chat feature to also congratulate the awardees, and as well to say hello to each other for those of you that know each other. You also have the raise your hand feature, and through the raising your hand feature, we should be able to field additional questions as well. So feel free to say hello in chat and pose any questions. If you have questions regarding what you're seeing about the mode of the presentation, we'll accommodate those as quickly as we can. And I see many of you are taking an opportunity to say hello in chat. Excellent and great to see. We'll give everybody a couple of more minutes. See, slowly, a couple of more attendees are coming, and then we'll formally begin our program. Once again, for those of you who have joined us in the last couple of seconds, welcome to the 2022 Public Service Awards, brought to you by the American Society for Public Administration Evergreen chapter. My name is Lucky Angelov, he, him pronouns, and I'm a faculty member at the Evergreen State College, currently serving as the president of the Evergreen chapter. With us, we have our distinguished presenters this afternoon or lunchtime, depending on where you're logging in from. And we would love to extend our welcome and also let you know a couple of the features that you're witnessing on this webinar. First, for those of you that are just logged in, you should be able to see a chat feature as well as a question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen, at the bottom of your Zoom display, as well as a raise your hand feature. Many of you are already using the chat feature to communicate with each other. Please use that feature to congratulate the nominees and the awardees and to say hello to each other. Many of you know each other from professional associations and engagements as well. If you have questions, please put the questions in the Q&A section. We will do our best to communicate them to the presenters, and we'll answer some of those in chat. Some of them will be answered live, depending on the type and the mode of the question. And we'll do our best to accommodate all questions that come in at any time that they come in. First, to begin the presentation, I would like to present a special guest that's joining us today, the current and past president of the American Society for Public Administration, Alan Rosenbaum. Dr. Rosenbaum is a distinguished professor at the Florida International University and is the founding director of the Institute for Public Management and Community Service and Center for Democracy and Global Governance. Very long, distinguished career with many accolades and international service, serving in a major capacity domestically as well as internationally. Exceptional career in public service and one of the stewards of the American Society for Public Administration. With that said, Dr. Rosenbaum.
Lucky, thank you for that kind invitation. And J. Paul, Mary, all of my friends at what is essentially my second favorite ASPA chapter, only after my own South Florida chapter. And let me begin by congratulating you all. Clearly, you are, along with my local chapter, the South Florida chapter, among the real stalwarts of ASPA chapters and ASPA activities at the community level. And it's really always a great pleasure to be with you. Obviously, we're getting together at a very complicated and difficult time in so many different ways. You know, the litany of issues that we're facing as a country, as a society, as a world, pandemic, political divisions, inflation, economic issues, threats to our democracy, recent Supreme Court actions or inactions, voter suppression, growth of censorship, and likewise abroad, the issues are the terrible war in Ukraine, but not just there. I mean, the reality is there are a variety of less noticed wars going. There are 10 wars. Many of them are calmed down at this point, but 10 wars going on in the world right now, where over 300,000 people have died in each of those individual wars. So we are in a time in which I don't know if you could say this is a time of the greatest crisis since the 1930s. Maybe not, but then maybe. And I mentioned the 1930s because that was a time of obviously significant reform. And it was out of that reform that ASPA as an organization grew. If you think about ASPA as an organization and the people who established ASPA, people like Louis Brownlow and Luther Gulick, Charles Merriam, Leonard White. These were all people who were very much a part of the reform efforts of the 1930s, probably the most significant era of reform in the history of our country, and a reform era that produced all sorts of things ranging from the Social Security Administration to the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Work Progress Administration. As we look around our cities today and our countryside, many of the really outstanding sort of products that or institutions, buildings, et cetera, that we see in our cities and countryside these days are in many ways product of that era of great reform. And I mention all of that because, you know, the history of ASPA, we've kind of forgotten this to some extent over the past 30, 40 years. But ASPA really had two major purposes when it was created. One was obviously to advance the profession of public administration, but another was to promote reform and good government, effective government. And I think to some extent we have lost some of that second purpose. And it seems to me certainly one of my goals as president of ASPA is to return our emphasis to that part of ASPA and that part of ASPA's history and tradition. And we are trying to do that at the national level. As some of you know, we have created a Center for Social Equity and Inclusion and a Center for Democracy and Public Service, two different new centers to go along with the Center for Performance and Accountability that is now celebrating its 25th anniversary. So we will now have three permanent centers functioning within national ASPA, and each of them obviously represent important initiatives. Likewise, as president, I have appointed task forces to look at issues like our relationships as an association with other associations and how to encourage greater community engagement in terms of the kind of research activities that those of us on the academic side are doing. So all of this, I won't continue on, but I will just conclude by saying that as we are returning to this original, one of these original goals of ASPA at the national level, I really urge you to think about doing the same at the local level, to getting more greatly engaged in your local community, because we all know that the fundamental heart of American democracy and really any democratic system is the kind of engagement that occurs at the local level. So again, let me congratulate you as a chapter on your considerable efforts, urge you on to even bigger and better things, and thank you once again for including me in this event. It's a great honor and a great pleasure to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alan. And what an introduction and a history overview, and an amazing call to service, in my opinion, because as you say, ASPA as an association has a rich history about improving governance, and I really appreciate the call to local service, which is, again, for those of you that are joining, enroll in your local chapters, wherever that may be. And I am glad that we are second favorites to the South Florida chapter. Greatly appreciate it, and we'll keep on doing as much as we can to spread the message of ASPA, to empower practitioners at the local level, and to make sure that we are part of the solutions to many of the challenges the world is facing today, domestically as well as internationally. And in our chapter, we urge those of you who are not members yet and you wish to become members to join us. In the chat, you will see a link to our chapter, to our Evergreen chapter. And again, for those of you that are joining from somewhere else in the country, you have a local ASPA chapter as well. Feel free to reach out and see what kind of events are being put up. We have a link to our events calendar as well, to be able to get to know your chapter representatives, but most of all, become a board member, be able to serve as well. Once again, Alan, thank you for joining us today. We know it's very difficult to find time, and we greatly appreciate it. And we really, truly appreciate the opening remarks and that overview of ASPA's history and ASPA's purpose, especially its relevance today as well. Now, I would like to introduce Mary Van Verst, who will introduce J. Paul Blake, and will be able to walk us through some of the next steps of our presence.
Thank you so much, Lucky, and welcome everybody. We're really happy to have you with us here today for this special occasion. And it is my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, J. Paul Blake. J. Paul is a retired director of media and external relations at the Daniel J. Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington. He is serving his 6th term on ASPA's National Council. His professional service includes 3 terms as president of ASPA's Evergreen chapter. In 2013, the Evergreen chapter awarded J. Paul a Lifetime of Public Service Award. He is a member of ASPA's Endowment Board. He chaired the Financial Management Committee and has served on the Governance Committee, the Ethics Committee, which revised the Society's Code of Ethics, and the Ethics and Standards Implementation Committee. J. Paul is a recipient of the Donald C. Stone Service to ASPA Award in 2016. He received a Chester Newland Presidential Citation of Merit Award at the 2017, 2018, and 2019 annual conferences. As a member of ASPA's delegations, he has presented papers in Japan and South Korea. In fact, in 2009, J. Paul and I were together in a delegation to Japan. He is a former member of the advisory board for the University of Washington Public Relations and Strategic Communications Certificate Program. His past memberships include the International Association for Public Participation, the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, the Seattle Association of Black Journalists, the Black Heritage Society of Washington State, Tabor 100, and Blacks in Government. I welcome my friend J. Paul Blake to the virtual podium to introduce our keynote speaker.
Well, thank you, Mary, for that very, very kind introduction. And you are indeed a great friend and a great colleague in the ASPA movement. I appreciate your invitation to be involved in today's program. It's wonderful to be with you, President Rosenblum, your fellow Evergreen chapter board members, your chapter members, the award recipients, and others, including our guest speaker, Nick Licata. Having Nick as the guest speaker for this National Public Service Week recognition event is appropriate for many reasons. Public service and citizen engagement have been prominent throughout Nick's adult life. In addition, he has inspired and encouraged citizens, including his constituents, to become actively involved and engaged in their communities and governance. Nick was a Seattle City Council member for 18 years, including serving as council president. His term included some memorable events and developments, including Y2K, the World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference, the Cedar River Habitat Conservation Plan, and he sponsored the creation of the Civilian Police Oversight Committee for the City of Seattle. Nick chaired numerous committees, including budget, parks, public safety, human services, housing, and arts and culture. The nation named Nick Progressive Municipal Official of the Year while Seattle Weekly named him Best Local Politician. Nick wrote the legislation establishing paid sick leave and a $15 minimum wage for all employees in the city. Nick earned a master's degree in sociology from the University of Washington. He has been a guest lecturer at many universities. He was the founding board chair of Local Progress, a national network of more than 1,000 urban elected officials. Nick served on the board of National Municipal Democrat Officials. In addition to self-publishing a children's book, Nick's publications include Becoming a Citizen Activist, How to Change the World, which won the gold medal for social activism. The book focuses on lessons learned from Nick's life as an activist to legislator. Nick's latest book is Student Power, Democracy and Revolution in the 60s. His newsletter, Citizenship Politics, covering political and social issues, has 10,000 national subscribers, with more than 70% of them teaching political science or sociology in 262 universities, in colleges and universities located in all 50 states. Nick, thank you for being our keynote speaker today. We look forward to your comments.
But thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I have known J. Paul for quite a while, and I really appreciate it being an honor to have the opportunity to address the Evergreen Chapter's annual awards program today. And I also want to thank the chapter secretary, Mary Van Burst, for making all of this happen. You know, all of the awards that you're presenting today, from the race and social justice to the collaborative efforts in public service, as I think was strongly pointed out to by Alan, are aimed to improve the public welfare. And these are days that are challenging the public welfare on many different levels. I think Alan did a good job of highlighting what the challenges we're facing. And I've pursued creating new public policy initiatives for some time in this area. And I've done that with the idea in mind of pursuing seemingly simple principles while being on the council for 18 years. So I'm going to describe some of the efforts I went through. I use stories because I think stories are a good way of not just illustrating, but just creating a narrative, a strong narrative. But I'm not focusing on the value of the issues to be solved, because all of them are important. Instead, I'm focused on how to use political power to enact the policies to resolve those issues. And as you go forward in all of our careers, consider 3 ways to obtain, create, and sustain power. Because I believe that if you give attention to those items and master those approaches, you'll be much more effective in achieving success. So I see the first principle as really simple. If you're an elected official, or if you're a public administrator getting into a position, or one who's already been there, look at what tools you already have available to you to make social and political changes. Now, I found that most politicians want to make changes, good changes often, but they don't start by looking at the shed where the tools are. And they often assume that because something hasn't been done, which they think, and believe it needs to be happening, it's because they lack the authority or the laws that will allow them to make those changes. And often the tools that are available that make it possible have been dormant because they've been neglected, but they can still be used. Now, how Seattle got the paid sick leave for all Seattle workers in Seattle is a prime example. There were approximately 200,000 people working in Seattle without paid sick leave. And if you are not one of the sick ones, why would you care? However, you should, because sick people carry germs, viruses, and they can infect others. The COVID pandemic is a most catastrophic example. but it happens regularly, whether it's flu or other diseases. Now, representatives from the grocery and restaurant employees approached me with this problem. And they said they wanted the paid sick leave for everyone in the city. And I thought, well, for city employees, but for everyone in the city? And they wanted to establish standards ensuring that employers provide a minimum amount of paid time off so they could take care of themselves if they were ill or their family members were sick. Well, I said, fine, I understand that, basically what, 135 developed countries around the world to have this, and we don't. But I don't think we can do this. Well, it turns out they had read the city charter better than I had, and I was elected to office. And they pointed out that city charters in Washington state, and perhaps other states as well, they have police powers, which makes sense, public safety, and health safety falls under that. And so they pointed out the city government already had the political power. We just weren't aware of it in this instance. So the work was not getting the political power, it was in exercising it. We had to educate other politicians and convince the public why it was an important power to exercise. In other words, stop the spread of the disease. So the hard work was, collecting data. We brought in health officials. We reached out to restaurant owners and others who might oppose the legislation, and they did. But we tried having a discussion with them. We worked with unions to reach out directly to employees. There was a lot of work to be done, but we succeeded in having Seattle pass one of the first and most comprehensive laws in the nation for paid sick leave. And it would not have happened if we had not been aware that we had the tools to make that change. The lesson I took from this experience was not just read your city charter, or for that matter, anyone in a position of power, look at the documents that might be available that you can address that problem. So it's a problem. It's a lesson that says, look at your mission statement of any institution. See if there's room to adopt rules or guidelines already in place to expand that organization's mission to improve the public or employees' welfare. Now, the second principle is, how do you create new ways to distribute political power to successfully resolve a political struggle? Now, sometimes public officials and administrators know they have political power, but they do not want to use it to alter the power balance between the public and the government or private institution. An example of how the city of Seattle dramatically moved public opinion to support an expensive bond issue, a tax issue, we're going to raise your taxes, shows how listening to critics and inviting them into the decision-making tent can result in a win-win solution. Now, before being elected to the Seattle City Council, I'd worked with numerous neighborhood activists who opposed spending public dollars on what we call big downtown projects. In 1994, these people, some people considered grouchy neighborhood people, or people who just didn't understand the worthwhile endeavor of government helping promote economic development, they were able to defeat a library bond issue. Now, libraries are the most popular issue in Seattle. People love libraries. So how did a very popular issue go down in defeat? Well, the neighborhood people saw too much money going to the downtown central library, and there was very little to the system's 22 neighborhood branches. So 4 years later, 1998, the library bond was again going to be put before the voters. And this time, I was a council member. I understood the critics' concerns, and I wanted to avoid another defeat. So I was on the side of passing the bond, but I understood where the criticisms were from. So I suggested to the city librarian, who was a new librarian, the mayor was a new mayor, at that time was Paul Crobble, and the city librarian was Deborah, oh my God, I'm forgetting her name, but in any case, and the city council members, and that I asked them to formally adopt many of the critics' suggestions. Now, the critics wanted reasonable things in a way. They wanted the amount of money allocated to each branch library to be specified. The staff argued that that would reduce their flexibility to adjust expenditures. And I have found whenever there's innovative changes proposed that involve a balance of power, strangely enough, it's not necessarily the electeds or the top administrative people who resist those changes. It's often the middle strata of management because it makes their job more difficult. It adds added burden to them. And I think that's what was happening. There's also a question of perception. You know, the differences between the critics and the I would say, government staff and electeds was essentially coming down to a question of what level of trust could be established between, I would say, neighborhood activists and the city government. So in order to link that trust with accountability, I wrote legislation creating a thing called Citizen Implementation Review Panel, CHIRP in short. And we also designed it so that, and I say we because I worked with other council members, half of the CHIRP members would be directly elected by neighborhood district organizations throughout each of the geographic areas in the city. So every neighborhood would have some representation, or at least not be denied it. And the other half of this CHIRP body would be non-city employees from the library board. And to guarantee open accountability and how the funds were spent, because that was a big concern, and still is, always is. People want to know, where's the money going? How's it going to be spent? We require that all bond expenditures be available to the public on the internet at all branch libraries, so you can just walk in and take a look at it. But most importantly, any significant change in the bond distribution of funds would have to be approved by CHIRP. Now, this is a big decision. It's a big compromise for the city because they're basically handing off some power. And the critics agreed then they would participate in CHIRP and they would openly campaign for the new library bond, which literally increased the amount by 25% of the bond. No more costs. But they also approved more funds for the neighborhood libraries in the bond. So the central downtown branch got a smaller percentage of the pie, but it got just as much as before. And after overcoming some trepidation, the city council unanimously approved the creation of CHIRP with the help of the prior opponents. The second bond issue was approved by close to 70% of the voters. Now, creating a new way of sharing political power was a very dramatic new bridge that we built. And it doesn't happen very often. It needs good discussion amongst the two opposing parties, but it can be accomplished. And you have to be creative in thinking about how to distribute that power in a way that's going to benefit the overall public welfare. Now, the third principle is to use legislation and administration or administrative rules to monitor and enforce laws and programs. And that seems sort of like, well, yeah, that's why we have police to enforce, traffic laws and things of that sort. But that often doesn't happen in the area of social programs or changes in, for instance, some civil rights or employee rights. So one of the mistakes that both elected officials make, and I believe even activists make, is that they make the assumption that, yay, we won, we passed new rules, and then we succeeded in getting something done, and they forgot that they need to continue oversight and enforcement. And one not dramatic big issue, but it so clearly defines how something that the public benefited from and was totally ignored until a small incident occurred, shows how if you drop the ball, you can end up losing a public benefit. So for instance, Seattle offered downtown developers the right to build larger and thus more profitable buildings downtown. And in return, the developers would provide certain amenities, and that included public open spaces. Now, these areas are referred to as privately owned public spaces. else known as POPs. And they allow more natural light to reach the street because of the taller buildings, right? So you have more natural light in the streets and a place for people to congregate. So it's not just canyons of tall buildings, there's plazas, and they're all available to everyone. So like most council members, I knew these existed, but I never paid attention to them until one day a couple returning from a political rally were holding a sign. I can't remember what it was. It didn't have any profanity on it. It was just protesting some national issue. And they were in a pop or pops. And the building's security guard came out and told them, hey, drop the signs or walk off this property because it's private property. Well, they understood about, strangely enough, these pops existing. They had a vague idea, but they weren't sure. And they weren't shouting, they weren't blocking traffic. So they contacted me and they wanted to know if this was a public space or not. Well, as I looked at the situation, two issues came to light. First, it was not clearly defined as to the rights to assemble or free speech, which were protected in POPs. And second, most of the POPs were not identified as public areas. Now, Seattle's legislation explained that the public space created by their developers, bonus that they received, should be accessible to the public at all times. But it did not define accessibility. Being a former insurance broker, I understood everything is in the definitions. I'm sure lawyers understand that as well, understand what the terms are and how they're defined. So clearly the building owners must maintain the right to exclude people who are behaving violently, harassing other members of the public, or damaging property. But that does not extend to infringing on civil rights. And this was a flaw in the original legislation. It allowed political speech in public spaces is a core democratic belief, but we didn't think about protecting it. So if the city's giving developers a bonus to provide public open spaces, those plazas must be open for political expression. The council added the new sections to the law to protect the public's rights in the POPs. Now, here is where constant monitoring is important. I knew that developers had to have signage to identify these plazas. But when I went out looking for them, because I thought I'm going to visit these POPs and see what's going on, I realized I couldn't find any. There was no signage. And what had happened was in many ways innocent. It wasn't a plot. The original developers who received the bonuses sold the properties to new owners. And the new owners who were unaware the plazas had been open to the public, I don't know if they read the documentation that went along with the building or not, but they never maintained these plazas as open spaces. So, and the city never maintained a roster of the plazas. So if you pass something and it depends on the compliance of the private sector in some fashion, make sure you're monitoring it, make sure that you're following it. So I basically went to the city department that was responsible and said, hey, you have to find who these owners are, what these buildings are, and where these POPs are. And after constant harassment, it took 2 years to uncover 26 of these plazas in the city. And the city always had required signage, but it had said that the city had to design the sign and the symbol and the wording, and they never did. So the signage never went up because the city never followed through. And it turns out a few owners posted POPs, but very, very slowly. These public areas were being converted into private spaces. So after much prodding, they developed a sign, the city staff did, and a logo, and they sent out notices to all the 26 property owners. And after another year, 4 put up posted signs. Second element, monitoring and enforcement. Without enforcement, property owners were not inclined to lose control of these public spaces. So in response, the council mandated that bronze signs be posted at the POPs and be visible to the public on the buildings adjoining those public spaces. So reclaiming these lost public plazas didn't happen overnight, but gradually all of them ended up having signage installed, and the public did gain back these public parks. But without passing new legislation to require that all owners make visible signage available, it wouldn't have happened. So listen, here is passing good legislation is not enough. Elected officials must monitor and enforce new programs or laws. If that doesn't happen, the laws disappear, and the public will lose whatever benefits were promised to them. Now, I have more examples, and we're doing the Q&A. Be glad to address those. I think J. Paul Blake even mentioned civilian oversight over police functions was one of those, and other more dramatic or just as dramatic sort of improvements were made. But I chose these because they show that these principles apply throughout a wide spectrum. And it's important, I believe, that no matter how good an idea is, no matter how good the legislation is that supports that good idea, unless those who have access to political power exercise it to create new solutions and sustain the existence of those solutions, those benefits will be lost. So diligence, creativity, and perseverance must be ever present. Anyhow, thank you for your attention. I would gladly entertain any questions, and I imagine at this point the staff or monitor or Lucky will take charge.
Nick, thank you. And I am keeping an eye on the chat, and I'm also keeping an eye on the question Q&A area. I do not see any questions in Q&A, so I encourage the audience to definitely contribute with some questions. But what a powerful number of examples, powerful examples. And I will start with the questions. I have some comments, and you really highlight a lot of the importance of while we try to teach our students, the future public servants, the students of public administration, the importance of tools and the importance of implementation. That policy is a great tool, but it needs to be implemented. We have a question in chat from Ben Brunges. He says, Nick, I'm curious to hear your perspective on how to rebuild a political system where compromise is common. We seem to live in an era of entrenchment and reluctance to make concessions. Are we stuck here, or can we do something about it? Thank you for your talk.
Well, Ben, you're right. We are in an era, and there have been in the past eras similar to this, but we are currently in one where it's not often a clash in differences in solutions so much as a clash of, I believe, perceived intransigence in ideologies. And so that if you have a liberal, this happens in Congress more than everywhere else, I think that's probably where the conflict is most apparent and then becomes magnified across the whole country. But if you have a liberal proposing something, the conservatives immediately will begin to think, aha, it's a step towards socialism. And, and then we have a whole dialogue about where do you draw a line between liberalism, socialism, communism, and just go into the rabbit hole. And quite honestly, on the opposite side, there used to be a conservative party that really was conservative. I think these days it is reactionary, and that is a real term. It's not a pejorative term. It's, you can look it up. It just means reverting to the past, and probably the far past. But when a conservative proposes something, often we think of it's reactive, and then the terms start flying out, fascism or things of that sort too. And also, racism. And the thing is that critical race theory is a perfect example of that clash. As many of you may know, critical race theory was a very erudite, complicated, but in-depth analysis on a legal framework that was discussed in law firms, in law schools, about what the influence was of slavery in the development of political institutions in America and how that shaped those political institutions. Okay, it's not a question of all white people are guilty of being racist today. Now they may be, but it's not nevertheless an automatic extension of critical race theory. But what happens is you can't even discuss then, from the opposition's point of view, anything that will make someone feel uncomfortable. Well, that's ridiculous. That means you close down all discussion and all conflict. You can't have any matters that discuss, for instance, that the wealthiest of our forefathers were slave owners. They weren't evil people. That was what happened. That was the system that existed. And many of them felt that was bad. It was evil, but that was something that existed. You have to deal with it and decide how we go forward. So there can be, I believe, I hate to say a middle ground. I like to think of it as a common ground of understanding that we want this democracy, if those who are in favor of our democracy continuing, and our democratic society, because the two complement each other, then we have to listen to other people. We have to recognize that while there's individual rights, there's community welfare. And there's often a balance that has to be reached between the two. And that unless you protect the individual, you just can't follow, for instance, majority rule blindly. I mean, for many, many years, segregation was the majority rule in many, many southern states. Someone can say, well, it was majority rule. Yes, but that was oppressing minorities. That was oppressing some individuals who were citizens. So the bottom line is citizens are all entitled to the rights of any citizen in a democracy. And that is where our common ground should be. And I think we can establish that common ground by recognizing we're both citizens in a democracy. What do you want? What do I want? What does this person want? Are we getting what we want? And so that's what I see as framing that discussion. And if there's no other questions, I'll just go on a little bit. And on the console, I use sort of a version of that. In fact, that's where I've come today. But when I was on the console, again, I didn't talk about issues per se, although it ended up being perceived in those times, probably rightly so, as the most radical. But probably today I would be considered the most radical. But I said the most important thing is what you want from government is you want a government to be accountable, not just to you, but to all citizens. And they generally will raise it. They'll say, yeah, okay, I understand that. Okay. And secondly, you want us to be responsible to you and how we spend money. Oh yeah, definitely in favor of that. No, you don't want us wasting money, spending $500 million building a private sports stadium for the owners who will benefit from it, but the public still has to pay $50 a ticket or something, right? So, well, okay, yeah, I understand that. And in other words, you're going down that line. And the last thing too, and this is something that I believe, if you go back in history, the progressives were the founders of this idea. We tend to forget that, is efficient government. You don't waste money. You don't enforce rules and regulations that do not benefit everyone. That's not efficient. You limit people's opportunity to lead not just a productive life, but a safe life, a life that has housing, a life that, like paid sick leave, can be healthy. That is efficiency. People have to understand that. That's not, I don't try to place things in the area of, they sound cold-hearted, strictly a morality framework, because then I think you end up people saying, you're just a bleeding heart. What I argue is that think about the kind of world you want to live in. And if someone else isn't able to live in the same world that you are, what makes you think they're going to want you to continue living the lifestyle you have until they have what you have. And that's not going to work. Anyhow, that's a long answer. Sorry.
No, I mean, because that is an important question, and it's an timely question because of what we're seeing as the divisions in society that are ideological, that are growing bigger. And there was an explanation of how this is becoming more prevalent. There was a story on NPR that highlighted this, and it was basically maybe we're becoming more divided because of how we're formulating our view of who we are and who others are. And the explanation was earlier times, go back to the 50s, 60s, etc. Everybody was watching the same TV show. You had one TV channel. Everybody was reading the same story. So there was not as much variation of the source of information. So everybody saw the same episode. They might argue about what it meant. They might argue about what it was supposed to convey, but everybody was seeing the same thing. Whereas now you have a plethora of options to choose from, and everybody has their own TV station that creates their echo chamber and biases, which can create that division between this is my reality and everybody else's reality is different. And it's interesting to see how do we formulate tools to equip our public servants to create that desired collective. And for my answer always has been it has to be at the local level because we have avenues for involvement and everybody seems to be able to communicate with their representatives elected and appointed in a much more tangible way. We had one of our students say that they ran into the city manager of Lakewood at the supermarket, and the city manager was basically flabbergasted that they knew who they were. And I was like, that was a great example of how tangible it is to be able to see the city manager of the jurisdiction where you live in line with you at the supermarket and to ask them about their decision making.
Yes.
And that is fascinating. This is, in my opinion, where we get involved. And there's an interesting discussion now in the public administration literature about our emphasis on the language when it comes to citizenry, because there's some who claim that that excludes a lot of individuals who are residents, do not have the legal title of citizenship, but they're no less of a community member. So that is also a fascinating distinction because I myself am not a citizen. I'm a Canadian citizen and a European Union citizen, but I am a US resident, very active in my local communities.
I'd like to comment on that because I have in the past. I think we need, again, as I pointed out earlier, so much as definitions, right? And I think the concept of citizen is been distorted or confined to a legal definition. And the idea of a citizen is not a legal definition. That is a part of the formalization. But to limit the idea that citizens are only people who receive a certificate or pass a particular test creates a funnel that limits rights. But citizens is not just a question of paying tax, because almost all the folks who are living in the United States, whether they're resident or have a certificate that they're a citizen, are basically supporting this country through their money, through taxes. But it's more important. They're supporting this nation by their work, but also by their attitude and by their social involvement and by their respect of the institutions itself. As someone who has that piece of paper that says they're a formal citizen, but does not respect the democratic institutions and says that they are no longer functional, that says that our democracy is not a democracy because it, in fact, is functioning as a democracy, what makes that person more of a citizen than someone who does participate and makes our institution work, but does not have that piece of paper? That's a discussion we need to have.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more on the importance of definitions because they are important and some people misinterpret them. Fascinating opening remarks. I am so grateful that you were able to join us and to set the setting for us to introduce our outstanding public servants who I believe really highlight everything that you communicated with us today. And with that, I would like to reintroduce Mary, who will describe to us the Outstanding Graduate Student of the Year Award.
Thank you, Lucky, and thank you, Nick, for that excellent talk and for your thorough answer to the question. We all learned even more from that. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
It's now my pleasure to begin the according of the awards. And the first award that I'd like to describe to everyone is the Evergreen Chapter's Outstanding Graduate Student in Public Administration Award. This award recognizes a student who is pursuing or has just completed a degree in public administration or related field in a master's or doctoral level graduate school program in a fully accredited college or university, with graduation in 2021 or anticipated in 2022. The award winner is selected based on nominations submitted on the student's behalf. We ask that nominators have an intimate knowledge of the student's achievements and commitment to the field of public administration. Letters of nomination were welcome from a faculty member, a program administrator, or student colleague. And here to introduce this year's Distinguished Award recipient is my ASPA colleague, Dr. Ben Brunges. Ben is an assistant professor at the Daniel J. Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington. He is a public management specialist whose research is focused on how to design and implement complex forms of governance. At the Evans School, Ben teaches Introduction to Public Policy and Governance for undergraduates, managing politics and the policy process, and managing public grants and contracts for MPA students, public management and organizations for PhD students, and values, ethics, and integrity in the executive MPA program. Ben's work has been widely published, and in the popular media, he has been featured on National Public Radio, USA Today, the Seattle Times, and National Geographic, among others. Ben, thank you for being here to introduce our selected awardee of the Graduate Student in Public Administration.
Thank you, Mary. It is my honor today to introduce my good friend, Dr. Rebecca DeBuen-Kalman. Rebecca graduated in 2021 with her PhD in Public Policy and Governance from the University of Washington's Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. During her time at the Evans School, Dr. DeBuen demonstrated excellence as an instructor, an academic researcher, and a practical scholar of public administration and public policy. A native of Mexico City, Dr. DeBuen has a BS in physics from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico and a Master's of Science in Water Policy Management and Science from Oxford University, an MSc in Public Policy from the Evans School, in addition to her newly minted PhD. In the classroom, Rebecca's students loved her. They highlighted her engaging lectures, the high quality feedback she provided on written work, and the desire that she had to connect with students over their interests and lifelong learning. As a faculty member who regularly worked with Rebecca, her teaching was exemplary, suggesting great potential to serve as an effective policy and administration educator over a long career. Yet Dr. DeBuen-Kalman is more than an excellent teacher. She's also a world-class researcher who's dedicated to advancing academic knowledge and informing practice. Her scholarship centers on urban mobility, particularly bike share systems. Using data gathered from a combination of archival sources and in-person interviews from the field, Rebecca's dissertation examines how bike share policies were adopted and implemented in Mexico City, including how those policy changes influence behaviors of both drivers and bicyclists. A chapter from her dissertation entitled "Can't Drive Today: The Impact of Driving Restrictions on Bike Share Ridership in Mexico City" was recently published with Dr. DeBuen-Kalman as the sole author in Transportation Research in 2021. It was also featured in Reforma, a daily newspaper in Mexico City dedicated to improving transparency and rooting out corruption. Dr. DeBuen has built on this commitment to practical research in her work as a postdoctoral researcher at UW's Earth Lab. Her current work seeks to integrate an equity lens to an applied policy area for ocean governance. Using data from around the world on ocean climate change, Rebecca has been working to identify ways to conceptualize and measure social equity on a range of ocean governance topics. When completed, the work will provide a blueprint for scholars and practitioners interested in quantifying and working to counteract the disparate effects of ocean changes on disadvantaged people and people who rely on the ocean for their livelihoods. Given current projections on climate change and how it negatively affects people near the coastline and people dependent on the oceans, her research promises to be of great interest globally over the next generation. So based on her established track record of excellence and her position to be presenting to be an important, practically oriented scholar, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Rebecca Dubois-Kalman, ASPA Evergreen Chapter's outstanding graduate student in public administration.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Good afternoon. As Ben mentioned, my name is Rebecca Dubois-Kalman, and I'm a recent graduate of the PhD program at the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Evans School and a fellow for the Ocean Nexus program at Earth Lab. I would like to thank the American Society for Public Administration Evergreen chapter for this recognition, and Dr. Ben Brunges for the nomination. As he just mentioned, I worked with Ben in various capacities over the past few years, and I'm very grateful to him for his mentorship and honored that he would nominate me for this award. Also, a special thanks to Dr. Mary Van Verst for organizing this event. The last few years as a PhD student have been some of the most formative and happiest of my life. I feel very privileged that I got to obtain an advanced degree where I was able to pursue multiple interests and develop skills to become a policy researcher. My broad interests and recent academic work lie at the intersection of environmental policy, climate mitigation, policy, equity, and health. And my latest work along these lines is focused on active transportation, so mainly walking and cycling policy. For my dissertation, I developed research on cycling policies in Mexican cities, where cycling is a new activity for the local government. One of these lines of research was a comparative study across 10 sites that sought to understand differences in policy implementation between cities. One clear trend in the cities that stood out as being more successful was the presence of public servants who understood how governments work and who patiently and diligently work to create relationships across government agencies, to institutionalize standards and norms to guide implementation, and who built ties with key stakeholders and local communities. During this work, I was reminded of how everything about the world around us is a choice that someone is making. In my recent work on cycling, for example, these choices shape the distribution and design of street space and determine how safe streets are for different users. These are choices by legislators and policymakers, which are ultimately shaped by public servants at the front line of implementation, where the rubber literally hits the road. This reminder has helped me renew my commitment to a career in public issues, whether through research, teaching, or practice, with a hope to contribute to shaping a more equitable world that creates opportunity and well-being for more people. Receiving the Outstanding Graduate Student in Public Administration Award from the ASPA Evergreen chapter is a wonderful encouragement to keep pursuing these goals. Thank you.
Congratulations. This is an outstanding recognition of amazing work and very timely work as we're struggling with adapting our modes of transportation across the globe. Congratulations once again. And I believe Brian will be able to show us the award that you will be receiving.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. I'm very excited.
Congratulations again. And next, Mary will introduce the Billy Frank Jr. Race and Social Justice Award.
Thank you, Lucky. The Billy Frank Jr. Award for Race and Social Justice is an award that honors the life and legacy of Billy Frank Jr., who lived from March 9, 1931 to May 5, 2014, whose dedication and leadership was forever changed the relationship between Native tribes, tribal governments, state governments, and the federal government. Billy Frank Jr. was a leader in the movement to ensure that treaties between Native tribes, tribal governments, the federal government, and the state of Washington were upheld. His work, which led to a strong U.S. Supreme Court ruling upholding these treaty rights established in the 19th century treaties, preserved a cornerstone of tribal culture. This award honors the work and legacy of Billy Frank Jr., to promote race and social justice issues that have had a lasting impact on a national basis. Nominees can be from any sector of the public service who have demonstrated a lasting commitment to the principles of race and social justice. Nominations included specific information about the nominees' contributions, especially relating to the changes brought by the nominees' efforts and the impact those changes have had for those served by these undertakings. And I would like to call on Ben to please introduce our distinguished award winner.
Thank you, Mary. It is again my honor to introduce Dr. Stefan Blanford, who currently serves as the Executive Director of the Children's Alliance, which is a Seattle area nonprofit dedicated to improving the well-being of children by effecting positive changes in public policy. Dr. Blanford has dedicated his career to advocacy and policymaking for children and families, especially to overcoming racial disparities in the education of young people in America. Committed to the idea that access to high quality, non-discriminatory education is one of the main ways to reduce disparities in achievement, earnings, safety, and happiness, Dr. Blanford has fought tirelessly against historic and systemic racism in Seattle and beyond. Dr. Blanford considers his role at the Children's Alliance as a continuation of his life's work to be in service of children and families. He was appointed by Governor Jay Inslee to the Washington Child Care Collaborative Task Force and Dental Therapy Task Force. He serves on the National Board of Partnership for America's Children and is the board chair for Integrated Schools, which is a nationwide organization mobilizing families to practice anti-racist school integration. He's also led youth development agencies and educational institutions serving kids from birth to college entrance in Washington, including serving as the school board director for Seattle Public Schools and teaching classes on equity and public policy and education in the MPA program at the University of Washington's Eden School. In addition, Dr. Blanford served as the principal of Lighthouse Consulting, which provided equity-based research, evaluation, and consultation services to school districts and community-based nonprofit organizations. He holds an Ed.D. in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies from the University of Washington, an MPA from the Eden School at the University of Washington, and a BA in Political Science and Government from Colorado State University. Due to his sustained track record of success, leadership in advancing educational equity, and the very real impact that his work has had on educators, educational organizations, students, families, and academic thought, I am proud today to introduce Dr. Stefan Blanford, the winner of this year's ASPA Evergreen Chapter's Billy Frank Jr. Race and Social Justice Award.
Thank you, Dr. Brunches, and thank you, Mary Van Verst, also for organizing this event. My understanding of the Billy Frank Jr. Race and Social Justice Award is that it honors the trailblazing leadership of Billy Frank Jr. in the state of Washington and all the way to the US Supreme Court. It also recognizes my role in racial equity and social justice work. And so I feel especially honored that my public service and my nonprofit leadership is being recognized as it is, as Dr. Brunches shared, something that is my life's work. While I was in graduate school at the University of Washington, and I'm a proud Evans School graduate, I remember a course in particular where the feedback that I got from the professor was that the school was not, that there was a separation between racial equity and social justice and the work of public administration. And I feel that this award talks about the intersection between public administration and racial and social justice work, and that those two things do intersect, and not only intersect, but profoundly are interconnected. And so I'd like to conclude my remarks by thanking all of my co-conspirators at Integrated Schools, at United Way of King County, at the Seattle Public Schools, and especially my colleagues at the Children's Alliance. And I'd like to finish my remarks by thanking the many organizers of this event and the other recipients of the awards today. Thank you.
Congratulations, Dr. Blanford, and it is an honor to be making sure that we highlight those intersections. As you say, now the field of public administration has come to the realization that social justice and racial equity work are important public administration work. They're not a separate field of study to somebody else. It is our responsibility. So congratulations again, and Brian will show you the award that is on its way to you.
Very honored.
Congratulations once again.
Thank you.
Next, Mary will describe to us the Advancement of Collaborative Governance Award.
Thank you, Lucky. The increasingly disruptive approach to political decision-making has increased significantly since the early 1990s, reaching its most intensive level in the past several years. As a result, we have seen deadlocks in government at all levels, resulting in decreasing the effectiveness of governance. During the same period of time, a new form of government decision-making has emerged, one that involves not only the responsible government agencies, but many other stakeholders. This approach is growing, but has not yet become a standard practice. This award honors organizations or individuals who have effectively promoted and engaged in this governance process, providing leadership for a program that is inclusive rather than exclusive, that resolves the differences held by the stakeholders and results in sustainable outcomes. I'd like to call on Lucky to introduce this distinguished awardee. Thank you.
It is my true pleasure to recognize an award, Mr. Jamie Pinkham, who has dedicated his career to advancing tribal sovereignty, self-determination, and treaty rights. As a citizen of Nez Perce, Mr. Pinkham has worked tirelessly across sectors as an advocate for tribal interests. Early in his career, he worked for the tribe, where he was elected twice to the Nez Perce tribe's governing body, successfully retaining the position of treasurer as the tribe was launching into gaming. He also led the tribe's natural resources programs and was involved in cross-sectoral partnership and negotiations over salmon restoration, water rights negotiation, and wolf recovery land acquisitions. In 2009, he became vice president of the Bush Foundation, a private foundation started in 1953 by 3M executives Archibald Bush in St. Paul, Minnesota. He led the foundation's Native Nations program, where he worked with the tribes across North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, as they redesigned their governing system. His work led to the creation of Native Governance Center, a Native-led nonprofit delivering technical support for tribes in government redesign. And in early 2016, became a lone executive to the center as a senior advisor to assist in their startup. In 2017, Mr. Pinkham was appointed executive director of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, a collaborative comprising of Nez Perce, Omatilla, Warm Springs, and Yakama nations. Under Mr. Pinkham's leadership, the commission advocated for changes to the operation of dams along the Columbia, Snake Rivers, culminating with proposal from Congressman Mike Simpson of Idaho to remove 4 dams from the lower Snake River to benefit river users, restore fisheries, and promote more sustainable energy generation in the Columbia Plateau. In June 2021, President Biden appointed Mr. Pinkham to serve as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Army Civil Works within the U.S. Army Corps. In this role, Mr. Pinkham will continue to represent Native American interests across governments and sectors. Mr. Pinkham has dedicated his career to working across boundaries to advance the interests of Native Americans, improve the ecosystem of the Northwest, and ensure that long overlooked Native people have their views taken seriously. He has worked in private sector and the nonprofit world and is now an executive in the federal government. He has remained committed to ensuring that partnerships are formed and built, power is given to voices and Native people of the Northwest. Accordingly, we're honored to bestow upon him the Evergreen Chapter's Collaborative Governance Award. Mr. Pinkham.
Thank you, Lucky, and I want to thank Ben for nominating me and thank the Evergreen Chapter for the selection. And I am extremely grateful that you've recognized Billy Frank with an award in his honor, because as this young tribal natural resource manager, I got to work alongside Billy, traveling from Alaska to DC, and I miss him. But his lessons are not lost on me. And let me just share one of my favorite Billy quotes. And Billy said, "We need to be peacemakers when we can, and warriors when we must." Both of those are difficult tasks to take, but the difference is found in outcomes. And Billy was a master of collaboration because relationships mattered. Durable peace mattered to him. And with him as one of my tutors, those relationships began to matter to me. And Billy's lesson was, even in conflict, and a lot of my governmental collaboration was built out of conflict. And his lesson was always to find a friend or foe who believe relationships matter and commit to being honest in our listening, understanding opposing views, and trying to build bridges or even mend those that have weakened. And with Billy's leadership and guidance, I learned to never burn a bridge or squander political capital over a single issue, because someday we might need one another and quite possibly even stand up for one another. Billy also had this knack of quizzing me. And for those of you who knew him, I just want you to please imagine his voice, his tempo and style when he would ask me this question. And he would ask, "Jamie, my boy, where are you going to be in the next 5 years? And just what the hell are you going to do with your life?" I never had an answer for him, because my career, as Lucky has said, has benefited from the freedom to roam in the private nonprofit sectors, as well as the public sector at the tribal, state, and now the federal level. So I never had a clue where I'd be in the next 5 years. Besides, I knew what was underpinning Billy's question, and it was really a challenge. "Jamie, my boy, keep preparing yourself to be better, do more, answer the call, and have some fun." And apparently I've done more than just have fun, because Ben and the Evergreen chapter of ASPA, through this award, you've recognized that perhaps I've answered to the call to be better and try a little harder. And so I want to accept this award, recognizing that the honor of one is the honor of all. An honor is a portrait larger than any single person. It contains evidence of our family and friends who nurtured us, people like Billy Frank. It represents the blessings that have inspired us and the hardships that have tempered us. And it reflects the lands we love and the traditions and history that will always remain a part of us. So on behalf of them all, I thank you.
That message to keep having fun hopefully stays with us. And the most important message that I think gets at one of the questions from earlier, keep building bridges. That is one way. Find people, friend or foe, who believe in relationships and do not squander political capital. Those are messages that we'll carry forward. What an honor, and congratulations, Mr. Pictum. And now Brian will show you the award that is on its way. Congratulations again. And next, Mary will provide a description for our Call to Service Award.
Thank you, Lucky. This is the last award that we will present today, and we have two honorees for the Call to Service Award. A life in public service is one of the most honorable and satisfying careers anyone could have. Despite this, many have shunned public service as a career or as an important part of a broader career. Others unfairly criticize public servants for their perceived lack of a strong work ethic because they feel they are overpaid, or perhaps because they feel that many of the services their government provides are not necessary. While some would reduce or eliminate some programs and public servants, most Americans would prefer not to eliminate, and yes, often expand the role of government. Whatever the sector, national security, local public safety requirements, health and welfare, the burden falls on public servants to provide these services, often in a hostile environment. This award honors those who have demonstrated a devotion to public service, either as a practitioner, as an academic who teaches and encourages students to enter public service, or any other individual who appreciates the value of public service and provides support and encouragement so that the best among us will follow this career path. We have selected 2 people for this award, as I said. I'd like to re-welcome J. Paul Blake to introduce one of them.
Well, thanks again, Mary. And I am pleased to introduce a recipient of the Call to Service Award, Charlie Bush, who exemplifies the award's description that you've shared. After more than 20 years serving municipalities in Arizona and the state of Washington, Charlie began serving as the Sedro-Woolley City Administrator in November of 2021. Charlie is responsible for the management of the city and implementation of public policy under the direction of Mayor Julia Johnson, who joins us today. Charlie works closely with elected officials, city staff, businesses, nonprofit organizations, other governments, and community members in performing his duties. Having just completed his first 6 months here in Sedro-Woolley, Charlie Bush exemplifies a clear understanding and knowledge of his role as city administrator. He has established an excellent rapport with the directors, staff, and the city council, setting a tone that encourages leadership, communication, and team building, wrote Mayor Johnson in support of Charlie's nomination. She added, Charlie works incredibly hard, yet exemplifies a healthy work ethic that balances career and personal relationships. We appreciate the internships he has welcomed and brought into the city, allowing for academic achievement and teaching opportunities within our departments for those residencies. We look forward to many great projects and achievement with Charlie Bush as our city administrator, and are both honored and thrilled to have him serve here in Sedro-Woolley, concluded Mayor Johnson. And I might mention that tonight, Mayor's proclamation regarding Public Service Recognition Week will be introduced during a public meeting, and I've read it and seen it, and it is one of the most wonderful, thoughtful proclamations I've seen. Originally from Pennsylvania, Charlie was raised on the East Coast and Midwest. He received a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from Wittenberg University and later earned a master's degree in public administration from the nation's top-ranked program, Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. Charlie is a graduate of the Senior Executive Institute at the University of Virginia's Weldon Cooper Center, the Senior Executive in State and Local Government program at the Harvard Kennedy School, Leadership ICMA, and Leadership Eastside. He served as an Evergreen chapter board member from 2003 to 2005. He was president and board member of the Municipal Research and Services Center and the Washington City County Management Association. He also served on the Association of Washington Cities Board of Directors and on the Board of Directors for the Alliance for Innovation. Charlie is currently a participant in the inaugural cohort of ICMA's Athenian project. He is a credentialed manager through the International City County Management Association. Charlie's career clearly demonstrates his devotion to public service, including his commitment to professional development, as well as his interest in encouraging others to consider a career in public service. Charlie, congratulations on this well-deserved recognition.
Thank you, J. Paul. Thank you, Mary. Thank you to the ASPA Evergreen chapter. I'm very grateful to receive the Call to Service Award and humbled by the accomplishments of the other award recipients. I recognize that there are many people worthy of this award in my profession and throughout public service. So in a way, I feel like I'm representing all the folks out there. Thanks is really, I'm just so grateful for this. So greatly appreciated. I want to thank the mayor, Julia Johnson, for her words. Sedro-Woolley is an amazing city with an even more amazing mayor. We have a fantastic team of employees here as well. We've got a number of our directors, as well as one of our virtual interns listening in to this broadcast. It wouldn't be proper for me to really receive this award without leaving you with a call to service. So I'm going to provide a little bit of insight from my career Dr. Marty Vanacore was the city manager in Glendale, Arizona when I was a 23-year-old intern there in 1998, 1999, and his words and actions had a huge impact on my career. Marty's advice for a career in public service was simply do good. When I would thank him for all that he had invested in me, he would just say, just go do it for someone else someday. And I've really tried to carry Marty's words about public service and his challenge forward throughout my career. And I challenge everybody to do the same who has an opportunity to work in public service or in any profession. Give freely and expect nothing in return. About a decade ago, former King County Executive and Deputy Secretary at Housing and Urban Development, Ron Sims, was a keynote speaker at the Washington City County Management Association. Cities were struggling with the impacts of the Great Recession, and I remember distinctly Ron's enthusiasm, which took me by surprise. He wished that he was at the beginning of his career because he was so excited to more deeply engage in the challenging environment that public servants were facing. Conversations that could not previously occur were occurring in the depth of that recession, and he felt the possibilities were endless for local government. At the time, I was feeling a bit beleaguered by all that we were trying to manage through, but Ron's message was both inspirational and memorable. Fast forwarding to today, things have become even more challenging and more polarized, yet I think that Ron's message is more relevant than ever. I was talking with someone I was mentoring recently about how critical it is for the future of democracy that those of us who are well-skilled, experienced, and positioned continue to step up and lead during these times. The future of our government institutions, as we've known them, literally may depend upon it. We're provided this opportunity at this time in history where what we do matters a lot, and it is our responsibility to meet that opportunity. I want to thank you again for the Call to Service Award, and I'm grateful to receive it on behalf of public servants everywhere.
Congratulations, Charlie. And again, that call to service will keep on amplifying it and elevating that message. And hopefully we have many productive awards going forward. I will take this opportunity to introduce our next award recipient. Our 2022 award goes also to Melody Rodriguez. Melody is a former student of mine, and I will basically sum up my experience or knowledge of Melody's work ethic in the classroom that I know has also translated professionally as well. It was a winter quarter. We were doing an evening class in budgeting and finance on our Tacoma campus, and we had multiple events that prevented us to actually have the in-class sessions. And this was way before COVID. So remote instruction was not as popular. Distance learning was not the norm. But students basically said we could really benefit more from additional meetings, from additional content that we did not have an opportunity to cover. And Melody was one of the students that said, what if? Instead of having our evaluation week is currently open, what if we actually had an extra class? We combined, everybody was able to do, or everybody was willing to do. So I put it as an offer to students saying, well, okay, let's have an optional class for everybody who wants to learn more about budgeting and finance. We'll be here at our previously scheduled date and time during evaluation week. You don't have to, it's optional if you want to come. To my surprise, because believe me, as an educator, whenever you have an opportunity to have students come back to the classroom, usually after they're no longer required to do so, whenever there's an optional activity, there's no extra credit involved. Melody was one of the students who said, no, we want this, but to my surprise, everybody showed up. Students really were eager to learn. And this is testament not only to Melody's work ethic in the classroom, but also in the community. My knowledge of Melody's work has always led to admiration because Melody works with a lot of young people, making sure that they're involved, making sure that they prioritize education. And as a result, in 2021, she was awarded the Excellence in Mentoring Award for a lifetime achievement. This award is given to individuals who dedicate their life's work to supporting youth through mentoring programs. And Melody was recognized as the founder and director of Proyecto Mole, a Latino student support program under the Leadership Foundation that exists to inspire, prepare, and mobilize Latino youth and young adults as leaders in their communities since 2007. She has spent the last 27 years supporting youth in Tacoma to realize their potential and see that they are a vital part of the community. Melody has also worked with the College Success Foundation, serving as the college preparatory advisor for the Achievers program at Mount Tacoma High School since 2012, and serves as one of the College Success Foundation's post-secondary access strategists for Beyond the Diploma. Melody, congratulations.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Lucky. I just want to say that I'm really honored to be amongst all the other award recipients. I think for me, one of the things that I noticed during my MPA program with Lucky and the rest of the cohort is that the number of individuals who are from the nonprofit, community-based nonprofit sector wasn't very large in relation to the number of local government, state employees. And so it's just, I just felt like sometimes it felt like the program wasn't speaking to me, but it was amazing because when I finished, because it's now 28 years of nonprofit work in the community. And one of the things that I realized as a result of, being in the program at Evergreen and getting my MPA, I mean, prior to I had a lot of hands-on experience, but doing the MPA program really provided me with more of, I think, just kind of the reasoning behind things. And it also helped me as I went back into, my work field to think a lot more strategically. I know I took a human resources class, I think, with Lucky. And one of the things that really amazed me is that there's always this impression that for nonprofit, community-based nonprofits, that people are in there because they care about the work. They're mission driven. It's like this sacrifice. It's almost a charity, like they're like, pastors or something, people who are sacrificing their livelihood. And I think that that's the perception in general in society when it comes to nonprofit workers. And so one of my questions I've finished my MPA is like, nonprofits need to have they need to make sure they know how to do the business of business, in order to carry out that mission. And so I find myself constantly pushing back when we're talking about compensation plans and staff retention, but keeping in line when people say too, like, oh, we value students. And so all our decisions are made. So I'm the one that asks, can you tell me how this decision is student-centered? What is the impact going to be? And I think the pandemic has shown, because there are a lot of institutions like the school system, I think about even just some of the different like employment, like with employment, but the school system, as someone who partners with the school as a nonprofit, we were able to, the nonprofit programs and community partners, we were able to pivot quickly in the pandemic. The school system didn't know what to do because they only communicated with students at school and through their school district technology. And not everyone had that. And so as nonprofits, we became really valuable partners to the schools because we were able to text students, we were able to use Zoom, we were able to do all these things that teachers weren't allowed to do because there were no policies in place to allow for that. And so I think that, my hope is that, people in the nonprofit community will start to see themselves not as just, that we're lucky that we're getting funding, public funding. We're lucky that the schools let us in. I think that, we as nonprofit professionals and as organizations, we bring a lot to the table, and we are partners. We are not subordinates to these larger institutions. And I think, the public sector, local municipalities, the city, a lot of we get City of Tacoma money. The cities need to recognize that if your school system can't graduate a student for the amount of money that they have, how do you expect a nonprofit program to provide after school tutoring to 200 kids a day? with this little, very little amount that doesn't, that's just a drop in the bucket in the school system. So that's kind of, like, I think that's why I'm so excited that I was recognized, because I think it's a voice that isn't often heard in the public sector. And I think it needs to be said, because I know personally that I have had two of my former students, two of my mentees, who one has finished the MPA program at Evergreen, one is currently in the program, and they're both working in higher ed. And it has changed. I mean, they have nonprofit experience just from being participants. And it really has changed the way they look at how these institutions work with community partners and what true partnership really looks like. And so, those of you who are working in these larger institutions or in these larger systems, really think about how you value your nonprofit partners. What does collaboration look like? And, like, include them. Don't come to them after the fact when you plan. Include them in the process of planning. Thank you.
Melody, thank you. Always a pleasure to have a conversation with you, a frank conversation about the challenges facing public service, because as somebody who is very passionate about collaborative governance, broadly speaking, it is not just about the public sector. As Nick mentioned earlier, it's not just about policies. We actually need implementation and oversight and monitoring. It needs to be collaborative, not just with decision makers, but also with residents and citizens, not just in the legal sense. We need to cross boundaries, be it jurisdictional, city to county to tribal lands, be it sector, private and for-profit and nonprofit. And I think that is where we have a lot of benefit of creating those true collaborations. I want to take all of the participants, once again, congratulate all of the award recipients, and Brian will show the last award as we wrap up our presentation and our event. But it has been great to have all of you join us. And with that, I am also going to thank all of the panelists for everybody who took time out of their day. I'm very grateful for all of the presenters. I will once again in the chat put the website for our events page that we are going to be adding events to, including this recorded event. So this event will be added to our website. And again, if you're an ASPA member, thank you for your contributions and participation in all of our events. And if you are wondering what your local chapter is doing and how you can benefit, come and join us, become a member, run for board, take one of our positions and come and join the decision-making process. With all of this, I want to thank you all again, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in 2023.